A major international trade exhibition in Beijing and trade tensions between the United States and Europe. Hello everyone, I'm Asiye Namdar sitting in for Anna Naidu and you're watching The Heat. Hundreds of companies and institutions from more than 75 countries and regions are attending a major exhibition in Beijing. The third China International Supply Chain Expo got underway this week. It's a showcase for some key sectors, including advanced manufacturing, digital technology, and smart vehicles. One of the exhibits drawing a lot of interest is the Govy AirCab flying car. Meanwhile, trade tensions continue between the U.S. and Europe as President Donald Trump threatens to impose 30% tariffs on the EU if a deal is not reached before August 1st. We will talk about that later in the program, but let's begin with China's Supply Chain Expo. And joining me now from Beijing is Liang. She's a chair professor in economics at Willamette University in Oregon. Also with us from Paris is Andy Mock. He's a senior research fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. Welcome to both of you on the program. Jan, let me begin with you. This clearly a huge exposition, some 650 companies and institutions from around the world. Let's listen to the CEO of PwC China. She's really stressing the importance of this exhibit, and she's rather excited about it. Take a listen.
I think the Chinese supply chain is very important to the global economy. It's why there are so many companies here for this expo. I think part of what this is about building resilience into the supply chains, and part of why people want to come together is actually to collaborate.
Jan, how important is China's role in ensuring the stability of global supply chains, especially with so much uncertainty about global economics right now?
Yeah, good to be with you, RCA. So I think, as the CEO mentioned, this time is a critical time because with all the trade tensions and with all these sort of shifting and reshaping of global supply chain, it's all the more important for businesses, leaders, and NGOs to come together and trying to really maintain the resilience of the supply chain. Now, China, as we know, occupies a very important role or important node or indispensable role in the global supply chain. China is boasted to have 200 mature, industrial clustering. So from EVs, from green energies to, smart vehicles and to green agriculture, all in all, I think China is very important in maintaining the resilience of the global supply chain. I think despite, some of the efforts from the United States, for example, to cut China out of certain supply chain of high tech and so on, I think China still remains very important. That is showcased, I think, really by all these international corporations. Their CEOs are coming to China, including Jensen Huang from NVIDIA, including Apple, Tesla, and PwC, of course. So it just showcased the vote of confidence, as the organizer mentioned. The companies want to come to China and look for the opportunities to cooperate and to really build a resilient supply chain that is green, that is digital, that is efficient.
Yeah, I think you really make a good point there, Jan. And Andy, let me move on to you. I mean, Jan mentioned some of this, the fact that there's such a large international presence at this event. What does it say about China's importance in the global economy, and what kind of message does that send to the rest of the world?
Well, Asia, I think that's exactly right, that this sends a positive message to the world. We know that businesses, governments, but businesses in particular, need predictability and transparency. And I think this is exactly what China is providing. But more importantly, I think what China is demonstrating here is what I would call ontological vision. So if we think thousands of years ago, when humans looked up at the sky at night, looking at the stars, they saw isolated points of light. And it wasn't until astronomers realized that these are actually galaxies, not just isolated points of light. It's a new way of understanding reality. And I think this is what China is doing here as well. So this is not just a gathering of businesses and other stakeholders to improve economic efficiency. But I think this is a completely new way of understanding reality, that supply chains are not just a metaphor, it's not just a way of referring to a collection of different stakeholders, but it in fact has reality. And this is what China is doing. I think this is part of the draw that companies, governments, NGOs, individuals, investors all around the world recognize that China's approach is very powerful and very effective. And I think this is an important driver as well.
Yeah, I was speaking to one expert earlier in the week, and this is what he told me. I want to read it to you because I wrote it down. He said, overseas participation in these types of exhibits in China, it sends a clear message the business world votes with their feet. It prioritizes stability over ideology. What do you guys think about that? Let me go to you, Jan.
Well, I think the CEO really speaks to the business logic, right? The economic principles in this global economy. So it's clear, I think, despite all the geopolitical tensions, China becomes still a very important draw for all these international investors. And again, China, is a very large market, as the Minister of Commerce mentioned in a speech, that China's market is large and growing. China's retail sales will reach $7 trillion by 2025, which is this year, by the end of this year. So this remains to be a very important market, and China is the second largest importers in the world, accounting for 13.3% of the global imports. So China remains to be a very big market. So many companies come to China, invest in China, produce for China in China. And also China has these very complete supply chain and very advanced manufacturing capacity and innovative capability. And that's why I think Jensen Huang says, China is a market and is also a very important innovative center that his company cannot ignore. And I think that really resonates with many of the companies in the world, right? When it comes to the leading technologies like AI, Jensen Huang specifically mentioned, China has over half of the global AI talents. So that means China is not just for the market, it's not just as a world factory, but it's increasingly become a very important innovative ecosystem that I think companies wanted to be part of.
You bring up Jensen Huang, and we have comments from him. He was at this exhibit. Let's take a listen to what he had to say, and I'm going to come back to Andy with a question.
And 50% of the world's AI researchers are here in China. And there are so many innovative and dynamic companies here in China. It's really important that American companies are able to compete and serve the market here in China. It's a great springboard for all of the other markets as well.
Andy, how big of a deal was with the information we got earlier this week that NVIDIA can now sell its highly desired H20 chips to China? How important will China be for the global growth of this sector, especially when we're talking about NVIDIA?
Well, China is a vitally important market for companies like NVIDIA, like Qualcomm, because they have to invest a significant percentage of their revenues every year to creating the next generation of technology to maintain their competitive advantage. So it's a very, very important market. But I think it's more important to point out that I describe Jensen Huang's participation at this event as important symbolically. So he is really the man of the hour who is doing well by doing good. And what do I mean by that? So Jensen Huang, I think, occupies a unique role in the business world, not just as the CEO of NVIDIA, arguably the most important company driving the AI revolution, but because of his bicultural background, that he is respected and trusted by the government in both China and the United States, that he plays a vital role as a bridge in helping de-escalate the challenges facing this bilateral relationship. And of course, by doing so, he does well for his company, NVIDIA, as well. And I think it's important to point out that the H20 chip is often described as deprecated for a much lower performance version of the high-end H100 chip that it can sell in other parts of the world. But that's not the complete story. This chip actually is designed for very effective inference, which is what a lot of large language models are used for. So when we actually interact with a ChatGPT or DeepSeek, that's actually inference phase, which is different from the training phase. So I think, again, it shows the symbolism here, I think, is very, very important of Jensen Huang being at the China International Supply Chain Expo this year. It's not just about business, but he is playing a very, very important role diplomatically as well, and I think we shouldn't overlook that.
Jan, do you agree with what Andy is saying about the significance of NVIDIA?
I agree. I think NVIDIA really represents this sort of global economy, right? That global enterprise, right? That wanted to be part of the Chinese market, but also to be part of the China's innovative ecosystem. And I would say Jensen Huang is not alone. I think, Tesla's Elon Musk, of course, he has the Shanghai mega factory, which basically roll out a car every 30 seconds, and it achieves 95% localization rate, and just showcase how China is important for all these global companies. Not to mention, Apple. I think they have been in China for a long time, and they really enjoy all the profits that they make in China, but also really the competitive environment and also the cooperative, the environment that allow them to continue to innovate and to advance the technologies and to continue to expand their markets. So I agree with Andy. I think, both from an economic point of view, but also I think from a diplomatic and political point of view, I think these entrepreneurs, very forward-looking entrepreneurs, they become a very important bridge in bringing the businesses together and also trying to dissolve some of these political tensions.
And my next question is really to both of you. From an outsider like myself, when you look at these types of exhibits, there's a lot of excitement about cutting edge technology, the latest bells and whistles and innovation, if you will. And we saw a lot of fascinating new things on display this year in terms of manufacturing, when it comes to clean energy, digital technology, also smart vehicles. China's Govy aircraft. Let's talk about this for a second. It's actually an AirCab. It honestly looks something out of a 007 James Bond movie, a two-seater flying car. This vehicle is getting a lot of attention. Granted, it only fits two people in there. How close are we in seeing things like this in the skies over Beijing or Shanghai or wherever it may be? And what does it say about China's really ability to create some of the best and brightest technology to put things like that in the air? Andy, let's begin with you.
Well, I think back to the legendary science fiction writer William Gibson, who said the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. And I think, just as you're saying, Asia, that we can see the future in China. And this is not just the really cool technological advances like the flying cars, but we have to look at the system behind it as well. So this is a part of China's low altitude economy initiative. And just as we've seen with electric vehicles, it's not just producing the cars, because if you don't have the charging stations, if you don't have the batteries that can be produced to be safe, cost-effective, et cetera, you really cannot drive diffusion. So we think about technological breakthroughs. There's invention, there's innovation, there's diffusion. And the ability to diffuse technology, whether that's electricity, steam power, computers, EVs, flying cars, is really vital. And I think this is really why we're seeing all of these exciting developments in China today. The tip of the iceberg are the really cool products, but I think the part that's less visible is the system that produced it. And we can expect, I think, even more exciting developments in the years to come.
Jan, I'll have you have the final word on this.
Right. Well, so I think this really showcased, China's very unique model. On the one hand, there is the very much long-term planning, as Andy talked about, going from EV or from green energy, this has been decades of long-term planning and initiatives, combining, the state capacity and also very innovative entrepreneurs on the ground that. In fact, 70% of the technological innovations come from the private sector in China. So I think this is a very unique and very powerful model that combines the long-term planning and the vitality and innovability of the private sector. And at the same time, I also wanted to say, in addition to the innovation being really the center of this expo, we're also seeing, businesses are really, walking the talks of upholding, multilateral system. We're seeing, the Beijing initiative being rolled out in this expo that, companies, they pledged, right, to uphold and to maintain the resilience of the supply chain, to also maintain multilateral trading system as well as an open and cooperative environment. So I think this is very important that businesses understand that, despite all these geopolitical tensions, competition and cooperation are really the way to go to really roll out the next generation of technologies require the kinds of cooperations between, the different companies across the borders, across the countries. So I think this is an important message, in addition to all the cool, innovations that we're seeing in this expo.
Yeah, that's always my favorite part, all the cool gadgets there. Andy Mok, Yan Liang, thank you very much. We turn next to the trade tensions between the United States and the European Union. Talks continue, but President Donald Trump is threatening the EU with 30% tariffs set to kick in August 1st. To discuss this, joining me from London is Klisman Murati. He's the founder of Pareto Economics, the creator of the Global Power Index, and a professor at Helsinki Geoeconomics. And also with us from New York is Anthony Chan. He's a former chief economist at JPMorgan Chase & Company. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Klisman, let me begin with you. Once again, we have 30% tariff threat imposed by U.S. President Donald Trump set to take effect on August 1st. What is the likelihood of some kind of agreement between the two sides before that August 1st deadline?
It's certainly the case that both sides want to make sure that they don't end up in a worse position than where they are now. I think the 30% threat of tariffs really soured the cream for the Europeans, and that made them less likely, I think, to agree things on a mutually agreeable context. Also, we have to remember that the US really has three primary decision makers, right? You have Trump, you have Bess, and then you have Ludwig as it relates to tariffs and trade. Whereas the EU side, they have 705 members of the EU Parliament, and also the various country heads and the Commission and the various leaders there. So there's a lot more contingency building and a lot more debate and disagreement amongst Europeans as to how to approach this, as there is compared with the US. So these dynamics need to be taken into consideration to really understand what's happening at this current moment in time and what's likely to happen into the future.
So let me just follow up, Klisman. You're saying when it comes to unity and having being on the same page, if you will, the Europeans perhaps are not on the same page in terms of their strategy or approach. What is the main sticking point here?
Well, that's right. One of the main sticking points for many people are standards and regulation. The one thing that the EU is built upon and that they're known for is having tough and higher regulatory standards when it comes time to different issues and sectors, be it agriculture, technology, etc. So if this trade deal means that they need to compromise on these regulatory boundaries, then that's much less likely for them to agree a deal upon. Also, you have to see that some members of the EU Parliament have put in contingency plans if they are hit by 30% tariffs to potentially escalate a trade war with the United States. They're looking at somehow sanctioning or putting non-tariff barriers on technology and on the services sector, where the US has a trade surplus with the EU, whereas for products, the EU has a trade surplus with the US.
Anthony, do you see this as perhaps another negotiating tactic by President Donald Trump, and with so much trade and money at stake between the European Union and the US? In fact, let me look at my notes here. According to the European Council, EU-US bilateral trade in goods and services was worth $1.96 trillion in 2024. The stakes are high. Why would Donald Trump do this with this August 1st deadline and threats of 30% tariffs? It would impact both countries and their goods.
I think there's no question you are spot on that it is a high stakes game. It certainly includes close to 40% of global GDP is involved. So, yes, both entities are in fact incentivized to make some sort of a deal. We are already hearing some rumblings that President Trump is demanding a minimum of 15 to 20% tariffs from the European Union. And even that number is just way too high because, in fact, all they have to do is look to their neighbors and they see that the UK got 10%. So why should they settle for 15 to 20%? It is going to be quite difficult. And keep in mind that the Europeans have expressed a willingness to negotiate in good faith. But at the same time, if they're not able to strike a deal that is suitable or something that they feel is fair, I have no doubt that they're going to retaliate. They already have a series of steps and strategies that they're already planning, the anti-coercion initiative. I mean, they just have a lot of things out there that will give them the ability to retaliate if the United States follows up with the bigger number, the 30%, and even the 15 to 20% seems to be unreasonable. And if the past is any sort of precedent, these deadlines are flexible. So even if we hear that it's August 1st, I think that that number can be changed if somehow both sides appear to be negotiating in good faith.
Yeah, even Donald Trump himself has said tariffs are his favorite word in the English language, and he has pushed deadlines before. Klisman, EU has called these tariff threats, or tariffs, if you will, absolutely unacceptable. And if Anthony is right, and they do in fact retaliate and respond, what would that retaliation look like, and what would it mean for consumers here in the United States?
Well, it depends on what they disagree upon and what Trump does in response. If he does stick to the 30%, what we'll see in Europe is not only slower job growth, but job losses, I think, as a result of these tariffs, especially in economies like Ireland, Denmark, and others, which rely heavily on exports to the United States for goods. So these are the countries which are at the vanguard of trying to come together to find out a solution to this problem. But if we see, for example, a retaliation strategy could involve the EU putting tariff and non-tariff barriers of some sort on services, the services sector, which exports a lot, being the second biggest market, in fact, the EU for these services, technology, etc., software, we could see a slowdown in business growth for these companies, which means job layoffs, a freeze in hiring, and other negative ramifications that will go all the way up to the CEO. And the CEOs of the US will then coalesce together to come to Trump to say, listen, this can't stand and we must do something. What these countries and what these blocs can't do is reach a stage where they're both suffering and then de-escalate once the blood is drawn, because that doesn't help anyone. So right now, it's such a critical time for them to agree on mutually agreeable terms so that they can move forward with something that works for everyone.
You brought up Ireland. I learned this week, and I admit it, I did not know this, that some of the biggest U.S. pharmaceutical companies are in fact based in Ireland. And of course, Donald Trump wants these companies to bring manufacturing back to the U.S., or he'll raise tariffs on them as high as 200%, Anthony. But I think what a lot of companies are saying, that what Donald Trump is demanding is not realistic. Bringing manufacturing back in the United States is not like turning a switch on and off. Anthony, I mean, it takes a lot more time, years, resources than finding the people who are going to work in these plants in America. I mean, the Europeans here, especially these pharmaceutical companies, are in a bit of a pickle here, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. It took decades in some cases to build supply chains, not only for pharmaceuticals, but for other products also. And to expect that will turn on a switch, as you correctly point out, is unrealistic. And if you think about a 200% tariff, think about how unrealistic that is. That would mean that in order to make that work, that somehow the companies out there would have to reduce their price by as much as 70% in order to keep the prices somewhat stable. And we know for a fact that the profit margins are not 67 or 70%. So that number is nonsensical. It just makes absolutely no sense. It will completely disrupt the situation with a 200% tariff. My suspicion is we'll have something very similar to what happened between the United States and China, that the trade and the manufacturing would simply be hindered. And many of the people that depend on those pharmaceuticals will suffer because these numbers are just completely impossible to work with. There's no way that those profit margins can withstand a 200% tariff and survive.
Klisman, I've spoken to a lot of business owners and companies since Donald Trump announced his unilateral tariffs back in April. And big or small, every single business person and company I've spoken to, they're saying it is so hard to navigate these tariffs. It is so hard to plan for the future because from one day to another, you have no idea what Donald Trump is going to do or say.
That's true, and that's what we're hearing from clients all the time, be they companies or be they countries, in fact, as well. But there's some respite, I suppose, in this chaos, and that is once something is agreed, then businesses can then plan for that. So it's only a matter of time, I think, until something is agreed. And even if that agreement is disadvantageous to the EU or to the US, at least businesses have some sort of idea of how to approach business development into the future. But another thing to keep in mind is when it comes time to the incentives of both of these countries, both or this country and this bloc, they both have similar avenues for growth. Both want to keep domestic manufacturing at home and want to increase the domestic manufacturing so that they reap the benefits of this. So if Trump wants to encourage, through tariffs and other means, to bring pharmaceutical manufacturing, chip-making manufacturing, and others, textile manufacturing, to the United States, this is a zero-sum game because there's only so many manufacturing opportunities and only so many customers to service that would inevitably mean that the EU loses out on this. So both sides want exactly the same thing, and they're both equal in terms of their consumption, almost equal in terms of their consumption rate and in terms of their population, right? So this is something which is going to be the hardest thing to get over and to agree upon, given how staunchly they agree that manufacturing is the future for their economies.
Anthony, my final question is to you. We saw so much volatility on financial markets when Donald Trump first announced these tariffs, but the markets are not really reacting as much anymore. It's almost like this is the new normal, these on again, off again tariffs. So what are you anticipating down the road when we look at these markets? And are you surprised that the reaction is not what it was in the beginning in April?
Well, the reason it's not the same reaction that we got after Liberation Day, where you saw the market basically go down. And in fact, just a few days after Liberation Day, you saw that polymarket.com, which is an international betting site about forecasting the U.S. recession, it peaked in early April at 66% probability of a U.S. recession. And that, of course, was precipitated because right before Liberation Day, the probability was around 40% and it jumped to 66%. The latest numbers now put the probability of a recession at only 20%. So why is all this happening? Because financial markets are getting the impression, whether it's correct or incorrect, that somehow when these tariff threats are announced, they're flexible and they're not likely to be followed through. So that is the reason why we are seeing that financial markets are more relaxed. Now, time will tell whether, in fact, these tariff threats will eventually be negotiated and come down. But so far, that's the belief in financial markets. That's why they're a lot calmer.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Anthony Chan, Klisman Murati, thank you to you both. And thank you for watching another edition of The Heat. I'm Asiye Namdar in Washington.